I'll tell you what, speaking of things that were loose, the kick that Xia Li landed on poor Mercedes Martinez was not loose. It was tight. It was snug. It was stiff. There was no daylight seen through that, between the kick and the head. What is going on, Brian? You've been watching wrestling for 30 years. I've been watching wrestling for 49 years. Wait a minute. Have you been watching wrestling for longer than 30 years?
I've been watching wrestling, not counting Hulk Hogan's Rock and Wrestling or anything that wasn't actually into it, watching week by week. Been watching since 89.
Okay, 32 years.
That's right.
In the days of the territory, live studio wrestling shows were live, broadcast as they happened. If not, especially through the 80s and into much of the 90s, any territory television show was live to tape. There was no post-production. If somebody said something to get you kicked off the air, then you'd do something. Otherwise, you saw what you got, right? Do you remember any 10-year period where we saw as many people knocked unconscious, injured, incapacitated, unable to move, or unable to continue the match, or the match should have been called because they were unable to continue, but nobody was smart enough to do so, that we've seen in the last year? Do you remember that in any 10-year period when there were more wrestling shows on the air?
No, I never remember it being like this. And again, to be fair, we always kill AEW for these kind of things. This time it wasn't AEW, but this one was pretty egregious.
Well, and it wasn't, I will say this, it wasn't reckless, because that the move that was being done was the one that was supposed to be being done. And if you could work those moves, they weren't ridiculously dangerous, but apparently this young lady cannot, because I saw the 2-minute clip it was a mixed tag match. Xia Li and what's her partner's name? Bonnaroo? What is his name? Boa, Bonnaroo, whatever the fuck.
Bonnaroo?
I don't know. I knew there was a B in there somewhere. And against Mercedes Martinez and, oh God, that bland fellow, Jake Atlas. But anyway, they basically centered on the conflict between the two ladies here, and Xia Li kicks Mercedes with a kind of a pump kick from the front in the chest, and that was the first thing they did to touch each other when they got tagged in, and that knocked her down and looked like it gave her moment to pause. That looked pretty stiff, but they continued on doing some shit, and then a couple minutes later, this was a clipped highlight, I don't know how long later, she does one of those roundhouse kicks and knocked her colder than a banker's heart, like a UFC knockout. She slumped over shoulder-wise and pirouetted to the floor face first. And when Lee went for the cover, Mercedes was so unconscious, but she knew she knew that she wasn't supposed to get pinned. But when Lee went for the cover, she didn't kick out. She just raised her arm up, and she was still kind of stiff. Like she looked like roadkill that had been baking in the fucking sun out on the interstate, where Xia Li was trying to cover her and she couldn't flatten her out because she was knocked out. And then the referee had to stop it. This is happening constantly over and over. And I know accidents happen. And as I said, this didn't look like a maneuver that you shouldn't try to begin with. But I think old Xia Li needs to work on her kicks if she's going to be a martial arts expert. And the attention and concentration and effort to make all these matches either look like video game fights or martial arts movie routines is what's causing all this. And potatoes are as old as wrestling. Mike Boyette, when he was Apocalypse, the Soldier of Fortune, he came out first with camouflage face paint and camouflage outfit and fucking army boots on and was throwing those savate kicks. And that lasted about a week or 10 days. And they told him either quit kicking or take the shoes off or the boots off. So he started working barefoot. And I was managing him, but he, they had the private talk. And one night I'm seeing him getting his shit put on and he's taping up his feet. And I said, "What are you doing?" He said, "They made me take my boots off. They said they were made out of potatoes." Chris Champion, during a period of time, God, what was it?
88.
87, 88. Remember the grasshopper? He
did the crane kick from Karate Kid on Rick Steiner.
The crane kick, the grasshopper, whatever the fuck. Well, he wasn't the only one. Rick Steiner, what? Because Chris Champion had just enough training in martial arts apparently to be dangerous, and was going to do the crane kick like from Karate Kid and whatever the fuck. And he kicked Rick Steiner right up under the right in the mouth, just right up under the chin and the mouth. He did it to a job guy. Every time he did that kick, which he was trying to do it on a couple of TV tapings and a couple of different matches, and he'd kick the fucking guy in the mouth every time. And finally, A, nobody was going to stand there and take it anymore. And B, they told him, "Don't fucking do that if you can't do it." But again, the NXT guys and girls are better trained. They're in better shape than the AEW guys or the standard independent guys. When I say better trained, I'm not even taking into account the mental and the philosophical and the psychology of wrestling. I'm just saying trained as athletes and trained to do moves. The NXT guys and girls are much farther ahead than anybody else out there because they have a whole performance center and that's what they do. But still, you can't just tell this girl, "Okay, now you need to be a goddamn martial arts expert because this hooded figure has beat you and Bonnaroo all to shit on all these videos, so now you come out and you're Bruce Lee," if she can't fucking do it. And when you're just throwing kicks with that much velocity to the head, wrestling kicks, unless you just really want to be a prick, are not going to fucking give somebody a concussion when you're stomping or you're kicking somebody in a regular wrestling fashion. It's when you get this fucking martial arts bullshit. Goldberg shooting Bret Hart. Why would a guy that looks like Goldberg shoot a guy off and be doing the big fucking side savate kick anyway? For heaven's sake, Goldberg doesn't have the Bruce Lee physique.
Everyone was into the UFC, that's why.
I know, but yeah, and yes, and guess what? In UFC, people get kicked in the head and get knocked out and have their career ended, which is what happened to Bret Hart. Maybe Goldberg should have done it in the UFC instead of wrestling. This is not the fucking concept, folks. You are not supposed to be giving each other brain damage and having each other hauled off in a fucking meat wagon to go have surgery on some appendage on your body on a regular basis. Can you imagine? They only wrestle once a week, and they're always hurt. Who's got a concussion? Who just had their neck fused? Who's got surgery? Who's got this? Who got knocked out on TV? Who got landed on? Who fucking jumped off the top rope, did 3 flips, and dropped their ass on somebody's head and caved the side of their fucking face in? Whatever the case, it's ridiculous. And when they're only wrestling once or twice a week, can you imagine? That's the reason why guys that were wrestling 8 and 9 times a week, counting television tapings, didn't do all this stupid shit. Because you couldn't. You'd never make a living. And the promoters would go out of business because you couldn't count on anybody to be there for their advertised matches because they'd always be in a fucking hospital. That's why guys didn't do stupid shit. That's why guys trained and educated the fans to accept and to be excited by and to like and to be into shit they could do safely. And a big part of that, as we've mentioned, was making sure that the people were into them as people. Instead, the fans were into them as personalities, the wrestlers, instead of spot monkeys and tumblers and acrobats. So when somebody did get supposedly hurt or something bad was happening to them, you had sympathy. Or when somebody was fucking really putting the works to the guy you liked, you were mad at them because you were into those people as personalities, not just watching interchangeable fucking gymnasts go through complicated and often sloppy routines. So these girls weren't doing that. She just needs to work on her kicks. But this is just another of the many, we'll talk about one later on in the television review, of the many instances where guys are just fucking dropping like flies everywhere. When, I don't know. Anyway, I hope she's all right. But every time you get a concussion, it leads to being easier to have more. And then once you've had too many, they're going to, like Samoa Joe and everybody else, they're going, well, you can't wrestle anymore. Well, then what are you going to do? You're going to go wrestle for somebody else that's not as fucking strict and risk brain damage, but your big paying job is over with because some fucking goof couldn't fucking figure out how not to kick you in the head hard enough to cause brain damage. Or land on your head, or drop you on your head. We'll get to that later on. But there has never in history been this many ridiculous and unnecessary injuries, and they all come from sloppy shit. It's easy enough to get hurt doing this. You don't have to do it being sloppy or doing just phony shit because you had an idea. And that's what some of them do. They dream up some phony looking shit that'll be real cool for the people who don't care if wrestling looks fake, and then they hospitalize themselves. Well, I'm done with that.
That is one of the crazy things. Everyone knows what the business is now, and you can either accept it or have a problem with it, but everyone knows what it is now, yet they're hitting everyone harder than ever before. They're doing more to hurt themselves and other people than ever before, whether intentional or not. Yet everyone's in on it. It's hard to wrap your head around that, quite frankly.